and 10 a.m. Events occur in real time.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to FPC Radio Live. It is Thursday, August the 11th, and it is the official start of the first week of NFL preseason. And yes, I am not counting the Hall of Fame game last week. This is obviously the start for teams across the league to kick off their preseason, and that just means we're just a little bit closer to actual, real, meaningful football, John, and that just gets me excited. You know, I'm starting to get that feeling of just the entire week revolving around just one sport and one game each and every week.
You mean you're not, really into the Red Sox or anything like that?
Well,
Chris Sale's Tour de Force or Tour de France or Tour de Brookline. You're not really into the Red Sox.
Look, if I were in charge of creating a blooper video, remember those old blooper VHS videos that you could buy, I would be very invested in what's going on in Boston. But no, to answer your question, I am not. I do not produce those videos. Therefore, I have. Well, and I've explained this to you before. It's and maybe this is an excuse, but being out of town, it's harder to keep up day to day. And by that I mean, when I used to live in Massachusetts, you get home, or say you work until 5 or 6, you get home, and you throw on Nessun, and there you go. That's your entertainment for the night. It was easy. Now it's a little bit more difficult having it's again, and do I really want to put in the effort to watch the product that's on the field? I mean, look, the trade for Chris Sale, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because we have things to get to, and I don't want to tune the listeners out. But the trade for Chris Sale was a great trade. The contract, the contract. Whew, we're I hate to say it, but we're getting into like Pablo Sandoval, Carl Crawford territory when it comes to bad contracts given out by this franchise, and that was certainly one of them. But like I said, we're not going to spend much time on that. I don't want to bore the listeners or just tune out all the Boston fans that we have that listen to the show, because I'm sure they don't really want to listen to that. I'm sure they want to talk about the negativity surrounding the Patriots offense. We'll get to that. Not quite, though. First, John, I'm going to give you a moment because you are our resident tennis guru. And I say that in all seriousness. I don't really know too much about tennis. But I know you are obviously a big fan, have followed the sport very closely for a very long time. Serena Williams essentially announced her retirement tour just the other day. And, I'll give you the floor, talk about Serena and how much this means to the tennis world. And what do you think the impact of this announcement is?
Obviously, one of the all-time greats. That goes without saying. The debate is she the greatest player of all time? And my first instinct was to say, hell yeah. I mean, she's been around for 2 decades. She's had as long a career as Tom Brady. In fact, I think she won her first major before Brady won his first Super Bowl. So that's how long that she has been in the public eye and dominant, like Brady and like LeBron James. Those are like 3 athletes that could put together as the 3 best, along with, say, Tiger Woods of this century. Maybe Roger Federer you could put in there as well, who's my all-time favorite tennis player. But as far as Serena, the first instinct is, yes, she's the greatest player of all time. But of all people, Chris Mad Dog Russo, who's on ESPN yesterday, who does like tennis and does know tennis, believe it or not. That doesn't seem to make much sense, but it's true. But Mad Dog said she's right there, but let's not discount what Steffi Graf and Martina Navratilova did. And the other thing is, when Martina was dominant and Steffi was dominant, there were other dominant players with them. Steffi Graf had to play Monica Seles, and Martina had to play Chris Everett. So they had natural rivals. The only rival Serena really had was her sister Venus, who's not at the same level as Chris Everett or Monica Seles. So that kind of ties it in. But to be that dominant for that long, 2 decades, to me, Serena is the GOAT, but it's not a clear-cut choice. But, yeah, it's going to impact the sport because she's still a phenomenal draw. in the sport, because I think women's tennis at times has been more popular than men's tennis. And those times have been when you had Martina and Chris Evert battling, or Celis and Graf battling, or when Serena Williams was at her peak. So her retiring is going to dent the sport somewhat. My favorite Serena Williams story is that she won the Australian Open a few years ago while pregnant, which I just find, incredible. Like, we could talk about all the great accomplishments of Brady and LeBron and all the great athletes. They can't top that. In fact, they can't match that.
No, I can't imagine that they could. Yeah, but to your point, though, from an outside observer, it does feel like women's tennis is more popular, and that is certainly because of Serena and the Williams sisters. But obviously, Serena being the premier player of the two, it's hard to argue that. And like I said, I mean, you follow the sport obviously a lot more than I do. I just watch essentially from a highlight perspective. So I know the names, I know the players, I know the big players in the sport, but that name has resonated for quite some time. You don't really think about it until you step back and put it in perspective, and you're like, oh wow, it really has been that long. It's on par with like you said, the likes of Tom Brady, LeBron James, and Tiger Woods, and really those are the four people that are essentially named among the 21st century's greatest players. The players that not only exuded individual excellence, but obviously dominated on a team level. And of course, in that sense, I'm talking about LeBron and Brady. Serena and Tiger obviously individual, but even so, like, they just dominated at a level not seen, and just it's hard to separate those four. I think in 20 years, when you're looking back at some of these previous eras, those are the players, or those are the athletes that you're going to speak of. So
yeah, absolutely. And I of course always throw my man Federer in there because he won his first major back in 2003, and his most recent one, I believe, in 2018 or 2019. So he had an incredibly
But would
long
you
career
agree
too.
that most people, and again, when I say this, I'm speaking more North American perspective.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm
the three best.
I don't want to. I don't want to offend football fans out there, and I mean football as an FUTBOL. But yeah, I mean,
Messi and Ronaldo too, right? Messi and Ronaldo are two all-time greats. Sure, yeah. So keep it to North American, and also, women's tennis is huge, and men's golf is. I mean, Tiger Woods is the reason that golf has become so popular. I mean, I think he's had the same impact on his sport the way Gretzky had it on hockey and the way Jordan had it on basketball. You can argue who's the greatest of whatever, but in terms of growing the game, those three guys made it happen more than any other athlete that I can remember. I'll be the old guy and say Muhammad Ali back in the late 60s, early 70s for boxing. But yeah, you're right. In terms of those four, because the longevity is just amazing. And the funniest thing is that the shortest peak was probably Tiger, and that should be the sport that you have the longest peak, right? Because it's not as physically demanding as football, basketball, and tennis.
Tiger had a lot of injuries. Talk to me after 36 holes, all right? It can get quite tiring, especially John, if you're not that good, because you're taking a lot of extra swings. Trust me, it can be terrible. I'm trying to think, and to clarify too, and we mentioned this when we kind of started talking about this topic. We're speaking primarily, from 2000 on. Obviously, some of this success kind of trickles into the late 90s, but we're kind of clumping it into the 21st century here. I don't know. I don't know if there's a player in the National Hockey League that would fall into that. If we're talking like all time, obviously we're talking Gretzky and Lemieux and stuff like that. But in this 21st century, I don't know if there's necessarily a individual player that had, people might say Sidney Crosby, and I'm like, okay, maybe he's the best of the best in this, the last 20 years, but it still doesn't feel the same as those other guys.
Not the same.
Yeah.
No, not quite. Because
and
as great as Crosby
too,
and Ovechkin are.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. As great as Crosby and Ovechkin are, and they're obviously the two best players of this era, they're not quite Gretzky, Lemieux, or even Gordie Howe. I mean, they're top 10 players all time, but they're below those guys. They're not on the proverbial Mount
in
Rushmore.
terms of just like not only just impact, but like the stamp that they made on the game. And I'm not saying that. I mean, Sidney Crosby, multiple time Stanley Cup winner, obviously MVP. He had unbelievable resume, all that stuff. But like, there's been bigger stamps on the game than Sidney Crosby, and his during his time isn't so far. And like, we talk about obviously Tom Brady, and you don't have to say much after that. I mean, his success has doubled his next closest competitor, and it's not, you know what I mean? And that's all time when it comes to relative success, relative to, his competition when he played. You're talking triple and quadruple in some cases. And you know what? I'm gonna make this an Aaron Rodgers free insult free episode. So I'm not even gonna continue my thought there. You're welcome. You're welcome. I wasn't gonna mention 7 times multiplier, but I guess I just did. So that really wasn't intentional, unless it was, it might have been subconscious. But in my subconscious,
I'm good. I handle it. I criticize my guy without question. So
like I said,
7-1 is a tough argument to put back on.
This is, like I said, this is peak Aaron Rodgers love season. Okay, imagine this is a wheel. I'm going to put a graphic together one day, I swear, to kind of illustrate my thought process, where how the cycle, throughout the calendar year from mid-January when he gets knocked out of the playoffs until that point next year. That's kind of the cycle and how it goes. But okay.
No, you're right, because it's 7 months removed from his latest playoff disappointment.
Yeah,
he's going into camp. They're one of the favorites. He's one of the favorites to win MVP.
Look, Packers fans love camp, and look, I would too, because it's like, if you're a Packers fan and the environment down there is just unbelievable. The stadium's right there, smack dab in the neighborhood. I mean, you saw the video of Aaron Rodgers driving his golf cart to practice. I mean, that stuff's awesome. Like, if you're a football fan, that's awesome. So why wouldn't you love everything that's going on right now? But I was just going to say, I mean, I said I wasn't going to insult Aaron Rodgers, and then I think the next 3 comments.
You can't help yourself.
I can't help myself. But look, the reality of it is, I do love Aaron Rodgers. I just I'm a comedian at heart, John. I can't help myself.
There you go.
I can't help myself. But anyways, I don't want to get too far away from what I want to talk about next. That's Kevin Durant. I know we're going to shift a little bit back to the NBA, or to the NBA. But Kevin Durant obviously has been in the news for his trade request going back several weeks, but it has been reiterated with an ultimatum, mind you, and that is to jettison one Steve Nash and the general manager. Look, we've seen an abundance of stories linking him to the Celtics, and if you've read some of the request or trade demands from Brooklyn, you understand why that's probably never going to happen. But this essentially, his comments about, or the ultimatum, so to speak, has ensured that he's going to not be in Brooklyn next year, right? That's kind of his way of making sure that they have to trade him.
Yeah, because I think in some sense it's a brilliant move by Durant. He's kind of checkmated Nets owner Joe Tsai, because, Joe Tsai wants him back. He has him signed for 4 years. He's still one of the top players in the league, but Durant's like, I want to be traded unless you get rid of Sean Marks, the general manager, and Steve Nash, the coach. So Joe Tsai has put it out a few days ago on Twitter that he's backing his general manager and coach, which would lead you to believe he's going to have to trade Kevin Durant. And again, I don't know if it ever works giving a guy who's worth $9 billion an ultimatum. That generally doesn't work, especially Joe Tsai, who made his money in communist China and in Taiwan, and his family fled from Taiwan and China to come to the United States. So this is a guy who's faced some pretty difficult odds getting here, right? I mean, it's not like he was handed the money and, took the family business over. I mean, he may have, but he did it the hard way, and being somewhat of a really strong-willed guy. So sitting across from Kevin Durant did not intimidate Joe Tsai in the least. He's dealt with much more, intimidating people than Kevin Durant. But I think Durant has kind of checkmated Tsai in this situation, unless Joe Tsai is going to say, no, we're keeping him, we're keeping the general manager, and we're keeping the coach, and we'll go from there. And then what, Durant doesn't show up to training camp? I think he loves basketball too much to do that, but it would be an incredibly uncomfortable situation. How does the general manager and the coach even function knowing that their best player wants them out and that he really wants out of the organization? He wants one of those two choices. It's almost like if a spouse goes to another spouse and says, I want a divorce, and then they sit on it for a month, and then that spouse comes back and says, well, what do you think? Should we get this divorce? If you want me to stay with you, I'll stay with you. But the two kids that are 22 and 24 that still live in the house, they have to go. So now that other spouse is like, okay, do I want my kids to stay here or do I want them out so I can keep my spouse? And I did all of that, Ian, without saying he or she. And I'm very proud of myself.
Well done. Well, just
politically
like,
correct.
Well, just like me saying I wasn't going to insult Aaron Rodgers, and then following that up immediately with an insult kind of a jab at Aaron Rodgers. You did just say he and she, so
at the end,
at the end. No,
but it's a natural segue going from Rodgers to Durant because I've said this for years. They're the same guy. They're the same exact guy. Leadership questions. Ridiculously talented. I mean, make a case that Kevin Durant is the greatest scorer we've ever seen, and I think Rodgers is, I think he's the most talented quarterback ever, most naturally talented, whatever the case is. I mean, I'm not dismissing what Brady is all about, but Brady has been beat in the intangibles and all the other stuff by miles.
The problem, the idea of what talent is has been muddied so hard.
Right, exactly.
It's so hard to know what anyone's talking. I mean, you can kind of assume and pick up based on the tone and how people are using it, but so how you tried to distinguish it, I understood. Like I could tell you're just like, I don't know how to distinguish it. If I just say talent,
right.
Like there's so many, that covers such a broad spectrum of things, and it's like, some people just say it so blindly, like, oh, this is the most talented this, most talented that. But to your point, it's like I get what you're saying. It's the two not only their two careers mirror themselves, but their personalities, and I think that leads to a lot of some of those leadership qualities and non-qualities, those type of things. Because look, they're both leaders. I'm not saying neither of us are saying that they have zero leadership qualities. It's just it's different. It's not. They lead by primarily. I don't even want to say by example, because again, that also implies off the field or off the court type actions as well. But they're superior talent. Let's put it that way. That's the best way I can describe it.
They're so damn good, right?
Exactly.
So
their success.
They can't help it.
Yeah, exactly. Their success and their ability and what they accomplish on the court or on the field, or how they do it, especially in the case of Rodgers, because if he just kind of like, in what kills Brady is he's so mechanically sound. You're not going to find a more mechanically sound quarterback, but that's boring because it's just going through the motions. But what Rodgers does is, he does and I just saw it in like a training camp video this morning actually, and just a simple little slant route. He's kicking his feet around, you know what I mean? Like he's splashing around in the water. And it's like, that looks cool and the optics are cool. And the fact that he's still successful doing that makes that, that's what that talent is. So that's how they lead primarily. I think Brady obviously leads with his talent as well, but there are many other factors, many of which we can't even quantify or put together in a number. But Kevin Durant's the same way, because you can't look at what he has accomplished on the court and say that how can you not follow that if you're an inferior player? And there's a lot of inferior players in this league. But the one thing with Kevin Durant though is he's older. Like if you're the Celtics, and this was 2016 when he was a free agent and they were courting him, you do whatever it takes to get Kevin Durant on that team. And I still think, had Kevin Durant come to Boston, I think they could have won a championship with him. And not to say that, that this team was going to go on a run like the Warriors, but I do think his talent outside of just what he brings, forget about leadership or anything like that. His talent alone would have put that team over the hump. But it's not 2016 anymore, John. You have to tread lightly with Kevin Durant because, yes, you are getting a name and you're certainly getting a player that is still an incredibly great player. But for how long? And for how many games?
Yeah, he's played 90 games the last 3 years. You look at his career, 9 years in Oklahoma City, 3 years with Brooklyn, 1 finals appearance. Now, when he went to Golden State with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green and that great organization, he went to 3 straight finals. So obviously, he was the guy that no one could really match. I mean, he was that good in Golden State. Yeah, he's going to be 34 in September. He's had a myriad of injuries. I think he'll age okay because he's not an athletic player. He's more of a skilled player. Like, I worry about Giannis. When Giannis is 34, 35, is he going to be as good as he is now? Probably not, because he relies so much on athleticism and determination, and those things can kind of wane after a while. Durant, a much better player than Paul Pierce, but you remember Paul Pierce in his mid-30s was still pretty damn good because it was just all about skill. So I think he could still play, but you have to worry about those injury concerns. Right again, 90 games in the last 3 years, that's an issue. And Jaylen Brown hasn't been the most durable guy either. Heck, by the way, seems like half the league isn't very durable. While everybody's bashing Jason Tatum, give that kid credit. He doesn't miss many games at all. No. He's been incredibly durable. In fact, I think since the pandemic, since the bubble, he's played more minutes than any other player in the league. So, let's tip our cap to Jason Tatum for that. At least he, goes to post more often than anybody. So, yeah, I like the idea of Kevin Durant because I think it would be fascinating to see happen. But the rumor that came out yesterday was Philadelphia getting involved in this. And come on, for entertainment purposes, could you picture now? They're not going to trade Embiid for Durant. They're not going to trade Harden for Durant. And I don't know what the relationship is with Harden and Durant. Well, yeah, let's ship Harden back to Brooklyn to go back with Kyrie, who we couldn't stand. That was the problem in Brooklyn. It was Kyrie and Harden, not Durant with those guys. But could you picture a big three of Embiid, Durant, James Harden, coached by Doc Rivers? How freaking exciting would that be? That would be the talk of the league.
Yeah, it would be the talk of the league because I'd be waiting for that to just implode, and when it would implode about 5 games into the season, when they all finally play together at the same time and realize that none of them can share the ball. Like,
it would be awesome.
My God. From a Celtics fan perspective, absolutely. So if he goes anywhere, sign me up for that. Because, like, look, if you can get him at the right price, and I just don't believe you can, from the perspective of the Celtics, I really would love to see Kevin Durant on this team somehow. I don't know how, you know what I mean? Again, someone's, smarter at basketball cohesion can probably talk me out of it, but at the right price, and the right price clearly is not what we've heard come out of Brooklyn. So I'll ask you this: where do you think he ends up? Because I can't see how he starts the season in Brooklyn.
No, I can't see that happening. I think it's gone too far. And then you also can throw in Kyrie. Where is he going to be? Is he going to be with the Lakers? Is he going to be in Brooklyn? Is he going to be on planet Earth? Who the hell knows with him? In terms of the Boston package, Jaylen Brown, I think the Celtics would be willing to give up Derrick White and some draft picks, maybe 3 first-round picks. That might be able to get it done because I don't know how big the market is for Durant in a sense that he wants to go to a ready-made contender. And again, this isn't his choice. Again, Brooklyn wants to trade him somewhere that will go right ahead and do it because he's not a 10-5 guy because he's only been in Brooklyn for 3 years. I think there's a couple of long shots that people haven't talked about. I think Denver makes a hell of a lot of sense because they've got Jamal Murray coming back and they also have Michael Porter Jr. You could do a 2-for-1 swap with, some draft picks or draft swaps involved there. Now you'd have Jokic and Durant, which would be a very interesting big two. The other team that's been talked about slightly has been New Orleans because they have Brandon Ingram, who's kind of the poor man's Kevin Durant, and he's on par with Jaylen Brown as a player. He's a 2-time All-Star. So I think what Brooklyn wants to get is at least an all-star caliber player back and other things. I know the rumor was that they asked for Tatum and Brown, which is a non-starter, obviously. So I think you could look at Brandon Ingram, maybe some other players on that team, and draft picks. And New Orleans has a ton of them, and send Durant to New Orleans, and now you'd have Durant, Zion Williamson, and C.J. McCollum as a really good number 3 player. It would be comical to see Durant and Williamson because it would literally be Laurel and Hardy, with Durant being the stick figure and Zion battling his weight. But I think that those are also some opportunities for Durant. And we've also heard about Toronto, but they don't want to give up Scotty Barnes, who I think is going to be a superstar in the league. And Toronto, to me, is one of the best, if not the best run organizations in basketball. They're not just going to give away the house for Kevin Durant, although they would probably love to get him.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think a lot of teams would love to get Kevin Durant at the right price, but that's the thing. And you mentioned the trade package that the Celtics could potentially send over, and that's intriguing. But what we read yesterday or the day before was that they asked for Brown and Tatum, and that obviously is that's a you laugh, you hang up the phone, and then you keep laughing with no one else in the room. You're like, that's how funny it is. And you don't take them seriously if that's where they're going to start. But, sometimes that's where these negotiations begin with, the outrageous far right and far left. And eventually they come together or they don't. And we'll see. And I think, I think Brooklyn just doesn't have a choice. I mean, they're in a terrible spot no matter where they look. They can't keep him. They can't, they're not going to get what they perceive as the value for him. I just don't see that happening. But the one piece of leverage that they do have, like you said, is they could trade him anywhere. I mean, they could go Bill Belichick on him and trade him to, name the worst franchise in the NBA right now, John.
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say Orlando, but they're building something nice there with young players, and it's still Florida. Basketball is pretty fortunate that there aren't too many hellholes there. I mean, like in football, you get the Lions, although Dan Campbell's wildly entertaining to say the least. So there's places out there that Durant would say, yeah, I think I'm just going to retire at this point because I'm not going to go, try to rebuild
Oklahoma City.
Yeah, well, they've got like 450 draft picks over the next 10 years. And yeah, I mean, maybe he goes back there. He was wildly popular, and then he wasn't when he left. Obviously, left there to go to Golden State. But I think they'll work this all out. The issue is Durant has 4 years on his contract, so that should be tradable, right? But the problem is, after 1 year, he could walk into the general manager's office or the owner's office and say, I want out. He could do that. He could come here for 1 year and say, he does it all the time. I mean, he's like the guy with the Coke Pepsi challenge who can't decide what he likes better, Coke or Pepsi. I mean, it's just like, he was in Golden State in the most perfect situation, right? A great organization, an owner that was willing to spend, great general manager, coach, and he decided, I'll get out of here.
To be fair, I mean, I can appreciate wanting another challenge and maybe. Maybe the egos just didn't clash. I mean, look, I watched the Celtics go up against the Warriors, and over the course of 13 days, I just couldn't stand Draymond Green. Imagine 3 years with the guy, and so I'm not going to completely, knock Kevin Durant for that. I mean, especially because, as much as, I think people will, credit Golden State, the organization, the team, all that more. We've said it, both of us, I believe, have said it here. They do not do what they do without Kevin Durant. That's how important and how really great he was, and really kind of possibly changed the narrative for some of those players. Because I don't think you're talking Steph Curry in the sense you're talking Steph Curry now if they don't obviously they don't win and have that success in Golden State. So with Kevin Durant as being kind of what I think kind of the catalyst of all that. So without Durant and Golden State, I think LeBron James has 6 titles. Yeah. I mean, look,
I think Draymond Green said that as much, and Draymond's pretty boisterous guy, not afraid to let his opinions out there. He said we couldn't beat Cleveland unless we got Durant. They got Durant, so take Durant off of Golden State, LeBron would have 6 titles, or at least 5. Let's split the difference if you want.
Not 1. Not 2. I should have that, right?
See?
Not 2,
See?
not 3,
yeah.
not 4, not 5,
Not 6.
Still falling short of that projection, though.
Well, he was talking about Tom Brady at that point.
Oh, yeah, so, well, clearly.
I think that was what it was. And there was the Jim Gray connection. I mean, Jim Gray
That's true.
with LeBron. And see, I put it all together.
All right, I can live with that. Although that might mean that not 6, he meant 7. I think it's going to be 8, but that's a discussion for a little bit later in the season. So, all right. So let's shift into football here a little bit because we're getting ready for some preseason games tonight. But over on Full Press NFL on Twitter and, of course, over at fullpresscoverage.com, several of us have started to put out some of our top 5 picks or top 5 lists of various positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver. So I felt like asking your opinion, John. I'm going to ask, the resident, the wise man on this show, and that's just a subtle way of saying you're the older one. So I'm going to ask you.
Thank you.
Braden, our FPC Chiefs managing editor and social media manager over at Full Press NFL, put out his top 5 running back lists. And for those watching right now, I'm going to get your mug off the screen and I'm going to pull up the latest list so you guys can get a hold of it. But I will list it for you, John, because I know you can't see it. And I want to make sure you comment. He put out his top 5 list. Here we go. Look at that. Nice and fancy graphic with all the full press coverage. You can find this right on Twitter if you want to retweet it and comment it on yourself or on your own, or on Instagram. You can go Full Press Coverage on Instagram. Okay, plugs are over. John, top 5 running backs according to Braden. Number 5, Joe Mixon. Number 4, Dalvin Cook. Number 3, Jonathan Taylor. Number 2, Nick Chubb. And numero uno, Derrick Henry. Do you agree or disagree with that list?
I like Henry at number 1. I mean, he's just a force of nature. I mean, if you watch him run the football, it's almost like when we were watching Rob Gronkowski in his prime. It's like he just looks different than anybody else playing the position. So, yeah, Derrick Henry, number 1, makes a lot of sense. I would probably put Jonathan Taylor ahead of Nick Chubb. But Chubb is better coming out of the backfield. So maybe that's why, Braden went with that order. Joe Mixon, I think, is a great choice at number 5 because he's a guy who is also a very good pass catcher. And so much as we see in football now, it's so important that these guys can catch the ball out of the backfield, makes them 3-down backs. The passing game is so prevalent. I think that's a pretty good list. I'd probably flip Taylor and Chubb from 2 and 3 and 3 and 2. But the rest of that list looks really, really good. Dalvin Cook is an outstanding player. When he's able to stay healthy, he is a force. I mean, because again, another guy who can beat you in so many ways. That's a pretty good list. I mean, you could make a case for Alvin Kamara, who's had some injury concerns.
Off the field concerns too.
Yeah, that too. Absolutely. I mean, I would assume he's going to maybe see a suspension in his future. Saquon Barkley is the guy I always root for, but he just can't stay healthy. I mean, he had a great rookie year, and it's been downhill ever since. I mean, you look at the 2 Giants guys. Daniel Jones had a pretty darn good rookie year and has fallen off a cliff, and Saquon Barkley had a really good rookie year in 18 and can't stay healthy. But that's a good list. I just flipped 2 and 3, but no, good list there by Braden.
Yeah, look, I agree with you with Derrick Henry. There's just, even in his limited time last season, he still had 10 total touchdowns. I mean, the guy is just a force. And much like Gronk, if he's healthy, it's hard to, it's hard to ignore just the total package, the size, the ability, the ability to run, even though he's as big as he is. And, you never would think, we've all seen his high school highlights where he just run over people. Well, it's getting harder and harder to distinguish between high school and NFL highlights. They kind of look the same. I'm a big fan of Joe Mixon. I actually, not last season, but the season before, I actually chose him to lead the league in rushing. Unfortunately, he got injured and, missed most of the season. But last year was a really, really nice season for him. 1,200 yards, 16 total touchdowns. So, but that's what you're looking at with these guys. They're touchdown makers. Dalvin Cook kind of had a down year, but Jonathan Taylor, 20 touchdowns. I mean, and that was kind of the thing last year with him. Should he have gotten MVP votes? I don't believe so because one, the Colts didn't really have that much success. And 2, I do believe that even though I do believe Tom Brady should have been the MVP last year, I still think Aaron Rodgers had a far better case Jonathan Taylor for MVP. So
the one name we never mentioned is the highest paid running back in football, Ezekiel Elliott.
Who was
incredible.
He was really, really good, especially his first couple of seasons. But if we remember correctly, I don't think there's ever been in more recent memory, at least in the last 10, 15 years, a better collection of offensive line talent, because they just what the Cowboys did was they paid and they just hit home runs on several picks that, for a few seasons just created this wall. And look, I'm not going to say Ezekiel Elliott's entire success was based on that, but it certainly helped. And, I don't know. I let me see what he does this season, if he can kind of return a little bit to that. But again, it also depends on usage. He
also looks like a shot fighter to me, Ian.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been in the league 6 years. He plays a physical style. He's a 3-down back. He can catch the ball. He blocks. I just think he's a shot fighter. I mean, because those guys don't have long careers. That's why, obviously when you mention guys like Walter Payton and Barry
running
Sanders
backs
and
in
Emmett
general
Smith,
don't have long careers.
No, at all. 4 or 5 years, maybe. I mean, even the O.J. Simpson, and I know every time you bring him up, everybody goes, "Oh, I don't want to hear anything about him." But I mean, his prime was 5 or 6 years. That's why Terrell Davis is in the Hall of Fame with a 4-year prime. But that's what happens with running backs. Gale Sayers, the same thing. The rarity is, again, Peyton and Sanders and Emmett Smith and Jim Brown, who played 9 years and led the league in rushing 8 times. So yeah, those guys are certainly rare. But now, if you get 5 years out of a guy, maybe 6, that's pretty darn good. But Elliott just seems like a shot fighter. And to your point, you make a great point. That offensive line that he was running behind, you're talking about 3 potential Hall of Famers, right? I mean, Tyron Smith, Fredrickson, and the other guy that's still playing there. So the three legitimate Hall of Famers. I mean, there were times I'd watch a Cowboys game and he wasn't being touched till he was 4 yards past the line of scrimmage. Zach Martin is the other player. Yeah, so you're talking 3 Hall of Famers.
Yeah, and on the flip side, a guy like Jonathan Taylor, I think, led the league in yards after first contact. That's a guy who, regardless of what's in front of him. So, I mean, I really like the list overall. I can see your argument with Taylor over Chubb and everything like that, and it kind of speaks to, there are a lot of other talented running backs, and we might actually, I doubt we're actually going to see him tonight, but you can add a couple of these emerging young guys like Damian Harris, who's caught on a lot, or Ramondre Stevenson for the Patriots, we're going to see today. You look at, I mean, even the Browns. I mean, he's not young, but not Alvin Kamara, Kareem Hunt. I mean, they have quite a backfield there. And that's kind of showing the evolution of what the running back position is. And on the flip side, it kind of also shows how unique Derrick Henry is, because, well, he's a new age running back in a early 2000s mold of a running back. And it's pretty impressive. So, all right. Anyways, I kind of alluded to the Patriots, and for good reason, not just because I want to bring them up, but because they have their first preseason game of the season tonight against the Giants. And as it has been for however many years now that they've played the Giants in the first week of or during the preseason. Look, there's a lot of, let's just put it this way. There's a lot of people, in my opinion, that made up their mind that this Patriots offense was going to be a failure the moment that they, signed or hired Matt Patricia and Joe Judge. Therefore, John, I do believe those same people are very eagerly trying to convince everyone else that they're right. And I'm not going to say that they're not going to be right in the long run, or I'm not going to say that they're going to be wrong. I'm just saying I tend to not make sweeping judgments like, and I'm going to quote an unnamed reporter, and I roll my eyes a little bit, but this is the worst offense I've ever seen in camp, or something along those lines. I'm not going to rush to judgment when we literally have not seen a snap of meaningful football, and let alone meaningful football. We haven't even seen a snap of preseason football yet. I think the outcry by a very obvious segment of Boston media and national media is I think a little over the top, and I'm eager, honestly, to see what's going to happen with this Patriots offense. It's clearly going through a transition, and we've talked about it before, John. I hope that transition leads to opening up the playbook more for Mac Jones, because I think they took it a little easy on him last year.
Yeah, you want him in his second year to grow as a quarterback, as a leader, and I think he has that ability without question. It's just, of all the four major sports, when you get to camp, this is the one that gets over scrutinized, right? Like, you go to basketball training camp and, okay, so-and-so put 10 pounds of muscle on and he looks great. You go to baseball camp.
No, the camp gets the coverage. I mean,
exactly.
You have 24/7 coverage at camp on NFL Network.
And there's a million guys. Right, exactly. You got a million different people down there, and who's the former coach who's covering it and all of that stuff. I mean, yeah, you go to spring training in baseball, it's essentially, we're laying around the pool, we're going to do a feature story on this young guy who's trying to crack the team as a backup shortstop. It's a really nice slice of life story. So it's just different than any other camp. The only thing I'd be a little concerned with is some of the reporters that are, concerned are guys that generally aren't bomb throwers. Like Mike Reese, I think, is a guy who's not a bomb thrower, or Phil Perry or Tommy Curran. I think they're pretty much down the middle type guys. There are guys out there that are going to be doing this to get clicks. We get that. But, again, it's a new type of offense. The only concern I have is if you're bringing in a new type of offense, wouldn't you want to bring someone in who's coached it before? And that didn't happen with Matt Patricia and Joe Judge. So they're learning a new offense. Not just the players, but the coaches are also trying to grasp this thing.
No, and look, I mean, I'd be more concerned if the Patriots hadn't done this before. And look, I understand Tom Brady's not there, and that's the biggest, and I think that's the biggest bit of uncertainty for everyone. And they may not say it, but look, Tom Brady masked a lot of issues or potential issues that the team could have had. But at the end of the day, the people that are saying that, and I'm not saying you, I'm just saying the ones that are assuming that Matt Patricia, who, despite his flaws as a head coach, was successful in this organization, cannot be adequate. I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about play. I mean, the biggest concern people have is who's calling the plays, not who's installing the offense, not who's overseeing everything. It's who's calling the plays. At the end of the day, John, the play caller may be the most insignificant part of all this, and it may be just, how are they going through camp? And if you listen to the coaches and Bill Belichick, Bill Belichick's not concerned with what the media says. He doesn't care what's supposed to happen or what they, think should be happening at this point, because a lot of people want to see immediate, from the first snap of training camp, progress, right? I think that's the unrealistic expectations of a lot of fans and in some ways, some media. But to your point, Mike Reese is someone I would, try. I would. I do trust, and when he says there are struggles, I'm like, yes, of course, I believe that. Like, I do believe there are going to be struggles because, one, it's training camp. 2, it's a new offense. 3, that's just what happens. So to me, I'm not terribly concerned about that, but I do listen to Mike Reese. I just try to ignore some of the over dramatic framings of what's happening, and I do feel that some of the motivation behind that is more or less trying to prove what that person originally said was right a couple months ago. And to me, that's right. That's disingenuous. And that's when I just roll my eyes and I'm like, I'll continue to listen to Mike Reese on this. So, no, look, biggest thing this offseason, or biggest thing this season, and I've said it before, is where does Mac Jones, how does Mac Jones evolve? How does he, when does he do what he's supposed to do? When is he going to take the next step? Is it going to be this season? Oh, what the hell was that? Apparently something was playing in the background. But yeah, does Mac Jones take that next step? If he can take that next step and leap from year 1 to year 2, there's no reason that this team is not going to be better. Let's not forget, this was a 10-6, or I'm sorry, 10-7 team last year. Like, people are acting like this team was 7-10 or 6-11 and really has to take the next step just to make the playoffs. This team made the playoffs a year ago. If they progress just a little bit from last year, they're going to be a better team. And I think they've added talent onto this team, And I also think Mac Jones is going to play better. I'm not saying he's the second coming of Tom Brady, but there is a lot more that I want to see other than sensationalized training camp reports. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, we're still a month away from the start of the season. There's going to be 3 exhibition games. And Belichick's always been someone who's ramped up slowly. You know, we've heard that he treats September as extended training camp, but that he's always peaking at the end. Well, that hasn't been the case the last 3 years. They've actually played poorly after Thanksgiving, which is rare for them. And again, the common denominator there is Mr. Brady. I mean, he's the guy who could just mask a lot of issues, right? And I also think in terms of the ecosystem down there, when your best player, and heck, the best player in the history of the sport, takes coaching the way that he did, then the rest of your squad has to take coaching. I compare it to Greg Popovich with Tim Duncan in San Antonio. If Greg Popovich is yelling at, demanding perfection from Tim Duncan, then every other guy in that team has to take it. And the same thing worked in Foxborough, right? And so now that's not there. So that's obviously, and it's not coming back. So you have to move on from there and see what happens. But yeah, I mean, you have to give these things a little bit of time. You're installing. I also don't think they're installing an entire new offense. I mean, I've talked to some people that really know football down there, and they're like, they're bringing in elements of it. It's not like they're going to turn this into the Rams or the 49ers offense. You know, they can bring in some elements of it, and how much they run it, who knows? And again, a lot of this falls on the offensive line. I mean, I think that's probably the biggest concern because you get guys moving around. You got Trent Brown's now the left tackle. Isaiah Wynn's the right tackle. You've got a rookie at left guard. You know, Shaq Mason, who I think would have been perfect for the system, is now in Tampa Bay. So, you know, everybody's trying to learn these things. And again, you don't have a lot of padded practices as well. You know, there was a time when Belichick grew up in the sport, they played 6 exhibition games. And camp was like 2 months of 2-a-days in the heat, hitting each other with pads. That no longer exists. So it does take a little bit longer to ramp up. So we'll see, you know, what happens over the next month as they get ready for the start of the season.
Yeah. And look, I mean, like I said, I preach patience. Just let it play out. Let's see some football first before we declare Cole Strange a bust or you know, say this offense is the worst thing that they've seen all camp. So, all right, real quick, second game we have Titans Ravens, and I'm not going to ask you so much about this game as I am about their season in general. Which team, and we talk about the AFC a lot. We talk about Kansas City. We talk about Buffalo. We talk about Denver and Los Angeles and Las Vegas and all that stuff. But the Titans and Ravens, maybe, I don't know, maybe the forgotten two in this conference. I'll ask you, and we'll close the show on this. Which team do you see as has a better outlook this season?
I love Baltimore this year. I think that's one of my sleepers in the AFC. Lamar Jackson got hurt last year. They were 7-5 when he played. They were 1-4 when he didn't play. He's obviously a valuable piece to that team, so you want to keep him healthy this year. Also, they lost 5 games by 3 or fewer points. Now, oftentimes what will happen is one year you lose close games, the next year you bounce back and win close games. That doesn't always happen, but it generally can happen. So I think they're actually going to win that division, provided they're healthy. And it wasn't just Lamar Jackson that was hurt last year. They had no running backs. Their interior lines were decimated. I think the Ravens are going to bounce back and win that division. Tennessee, let's not forget, was the number 1 seed last year and then lost to Cincinnati in the divisional round. I don't think they're going to win their division. I think they'll be closer to 500. I think they'll have a little bit of a comeback this year, losing A.J. Brown. They really don't have a really deep receiving core. And Ryan Tannehill, you know, since he's gotten there, has gotten worse every year. So no surprise there. I think that Indianapolis actually has a better roster than Tennessee. But I think Baltimore, I don't think they're quite at the level of, say, Buffalo or maybe Cincinnati or whoever. Well, I'm going to put them ahead of Cincinnati, actually. But I don't think they're quite a Super Bowl contender, but I think they could cause a lot of problems this year.
Yeah, and look, I mean, we talked about how great Derrick Henry is. That's what Tennessee is. It's Derrick Henry or bust, pretty much.
Yeah.
And even Ryan Tannehill at his best was not a guy I don't think any of us believed could elevate a team to a Super Bowl. And you know, that's kind of like the Kirk Cousins thing. So like someone posted something listing all his stats and everything like that. And it says, is Kirk Cousins the best quarterback never to be considered a top 10 quarterback? And I'm just thinking that's a great example of just, numbers kind of being just surface in some situations, because the numbers are impressive. You're like, wow, look at that. I mean, look at this, look at that you can compare them to X, Y, and Z, but there's something missing. Like if you're this good, if your numbers are supposed to be this good and you can't win, or at least be in the it's not just that they can't win, they're never in the conversation. They're never, I mean, outside of preseason projections and hype, they're never in the actual conversation for the Super Bowl or for any sort of meaningful run in the postseason. And I think that's where you're like, okay, something is missing. They've had talent. Don't tell me they haven't had talent on that team, John. They've had a lot of talent, especially at the skill position.
I mean, he's had the opportunity to throw to A.J. Brown in Tennessee. And obviously, Kirk Cousins has as good a skill group as any quarterback in the league. I mean, you got Justin Jefferson, who's a top 5 receiver, Adam Thielen's awesome, and Dalvin Cook. I mean, I would.
That was before he had Stephon Diggs.
Right, and before that, exactly. And they traded Stephon Diggs for the pick that led to Justin Jefferson. So he's always had really good receivers in Minnesota. Good tight end. The offensive line's been a little wonky. I think he could have a good year because now he has an offensive-minded coach in Kevin O'Connell. I don't think Mike Zimmer ever really was a big fan of Kirk Cousins. And a lot of those defensive guys aren't necessarily fans of their own quarterbacks. It's like they look at them and go, I want to stop you guys when I'm on the other side of the ball, But I think Baltimore is a team to look out for this year, provided Lamar is healthy. And if I'm going to give any advice to Lamar Jackson, and who the hell am I get this contract settled, because if something happens and the style he plays, there's injury concerns, and get this thing done. I mean, do you have to be the highest paid quarterback in football? I guess that's a nice feather in your cap, but get something done. So
it only lasts about a couple months. It's like you have that title for 2 months.
Next guy, exactly. Yeah. I mean, right now Rodgers is the highest paid, as he should be. At $51 million a year, but it's essentially 3 one-year contracts. It's structured almost like a LeBron James contract. But I mean, these other guys that are getting $46 million, I don't know. I just worry about Lamar Jackson if he gets hurt and now his value goes down, and then Baltimore says, you know what, we may move off and draft a quarterback next year. Who the hell knows? But I would just recommend he gets this thing done. The problem is his mom is his agent, which is admirable. I mean, that's fantastic. It's a heartwarming story. But you want your agent to be detached, because when the agent goes in with management, there's a lot of slings and arrows in there, because the owner or the general manager, or whoever's negotiating on behalf of the team, is going to try to bring that player down and say, well, he was 12th in passer rating and he's not durable and he threw 3 interceptions in a playoff. They're going to throw a lot of insults at you. You want your agent to handle that. You don't want your mom doing it or you doing it, because it kind of will put a wedge between the player and the organization. So I would say just get this thing done. I know if he waits another year and has an MVP caliber season, the numbers will be astronomical, but why take that chance if something happens? Maybe I'm just one of those guys that when he golfs, likes to 2-putt, lay up and try to get a bogey. If I'm lucky enough to get a bogey.
Anyone who golfs knows that putting is never a layup. Just throwing that out there.
Well, the whole thing is never a layup. That's true. Many years ago.
Very true.
Many years ago.
Very true. But all right, everyone, thank you very much for tuning in. We will be back tomorrow to wrap up the week. And of course, we are gearing up for the start of the NFL season, which is just so close. So thank you, everyone. And we will talk to you tomorrow.